On November 1st, 1396, the grand interior of St. Paul's Cathedral in London was lit by hundreds of candles. Music echoed through the stone walls as a royal procession moved slowly toward the altar. Waiting there was King Richard II of England, 29 years old, dressed in golden silk. His bride, no taller than his waist, and burdened by a jeweled crown, was a 6-year-old child, Isabelle of France. If you're into dark history and stories that make your jaw drop, hit subscribe. You'll want more of this. This was no fairy tale marriage. It was a political transaction, carefully calculated to bring peace between England and France. Isabelle was offered as a symbol of that peace, her future traded before she could even understand the world around her. Her life, shaped entirely by the ambitions of others, would be marked by silence, separation, and sorrow. A queen at 6, a widow at 10, a prisoner, a forgotten symbol of what royal power often demanded: total sacrifice. Isabelle of France was born on November 9th, 1389, in the Louvre Palace in Paris. She was the fourth daughter of King Charles VI and Queen Isabeau of Bavaria, royalty by blood, but born into a country already falling apart. Her father, remembered as Charles the Mad, began showing signs of serious mental illness at just 24. He had terrifying episodes, forgetting who his wife and children were, running through the palace convinced he was being chased, or believing his body was made of glass. When he wasn't lucid, the country slipped into chaos, with rival factions fighting to control the throne in his absence. Her mother, Queen Isabeau, wasn't much of a stabilizing presence. Known for her ambition and political maneuvering, she often prioritized her own power over her children's well-being. Chroniclers accused her of having affairs and treating her daughters more like bargaining chips than family. To her, Isabelle wasn't a child. She was a tool for diplomacy. So Isabelle grew up surrounded by instability, royal madness, court scandals, and a kingdom torn apart by war. France was locked in a brutal conflict with England and divided by power struggles at home. And in the middle of it all was a quiet, observant little girl being shaped for a future she couldn't yet imagine. By the time Isabelle was 6, France was desperate. The 100 Years' War had drained the kingdom, and King Charles VI's worsening mental illness left the country in constant uncertainty. So when England's King Richard II proposed peace and asked for a new queen, France saw an opportunity. Richard, 29, had recently lost his wife and was facing rebellion at home. He needed a political alliance. French leaders, eager to end the war and stabilize their own chaos, offered Isabelle in marriage, along with a massive dowry of £800,000 and a 28-year truce. Even in the Middle Ages, 6 was young for marriage. Some English advisors urged patience, suggesting they wait until she was 12. But Richard couldn't afford to wait. He needed peace, and France needed the money. Behind closed doors, Isabelle's fate was reduced to terms and contracts. Her age, her life, just part of a deal. She was no longer a child, not in their eyes. She was a political solution. Once the marriage deal was sealed, Isabelle's departure from France became a public event. At just 6 years old, she was dressed like a queen, surrounded by nobles and diplomats. Her father, in a rare, lucid moment, blessed her with tears. Her mother treated the moment like a business transaction. Calm, calculated, done. Isabelle brought only a few personal items: her favorite dolls, a small dog, and the clothes chosen for her by the court. She traveled with a massive entourage of nobles and guards, not just to protect her, but to protect the political investment she now represented. The journey from Calais to London took weeks. In every town, local leaders held elaborate receptions to honor her. But behind the ceremonies, Isabelle was tired and frightened. She often cried and asked to go home. To the world, she was a symbol of peace. To herself, she was just a little girl, far from home, dressed like a queen, with no idea what waited at the end of the road. On November 1st, 1396, St. Paul's Cathedral was transformed into a grand display of power and peace. The church was covered in English and French fabrics, lit by thousands of candles. Choirs sang in Latin and French as nobles filled the aisles. At the altar stood King Richard II, 29 years old, dressed in golden silk. Then came the bride, small, quiet, and barely able to carry the weight of her crown. A 6-year-old child, Isabelle of France. She said nothing during the ceremony. When the Archbishop placed the ring on her finger, she simply looked around, searching for someone she knew, but no one was there. Richard treated her gently. He gave her private quarters, French-speaking staff, and tutors. In many ways, he treated her more like a daughter than a wife. For a time, she was safe. But safety was brief. Within 3 years, Richard would be overthrown, imprisoned, and killed. And Isabel's world would fall apart once again. In 1399, just 3 years after their wedding, Richard II was overthrown by Henry Bolingbroke, soon crowned Henry IV. Richard was imprisoned and later murdered. Isabel, now 10, was suddenly a widow. She had never been a real wife, but she had been queen. And now, no one quite knew what to do with her. Her dowry had already been spent. Returning her to France would mean admitting that and risking political fallout. So the new king kept her in England, held in comfortable captivity at Havering Palace. There, Isabel waited. She wrote desperate letters to her family in France, begging to come home. "I write to you in tears," she told her father, "for I am kept here like a prisoner, far from all I love." For 3 years she lived in limbo, no longer queen, not yet free, just a child caught between 2 crowns. In 1401, after years of pressure from the French court and a rare moment of clarity from her father, Isabel was finally allowed to return home. She was 12 years old, but France wasn't the place she remembered. The country was still in chaos, and her family, caught up in their own struggles, didn't greet her as a daughter, but as a political problem returned with no clear purpose. She had left Paris as a princess and returned as a quiet, emotionally bruised girl who had seen too much. There was no celebration, no joy, just silence, protocol, and the sense that she was already being positioned for whatever came next. And what came next was another marriage. In 1405, at 16, Isabel was married again, this time to Charles of Orléans, a young French nobleman and poet. The match was still political, arranged by her mother, but something unexpected happened. It worked. Charles was gentle, thoughtful, and deeply devoted to her. For the first time in her life, Isabel wasn't treated as a bargaining chip. She was loved for who she was, not what she represented. They shared a quiet bond through poetry, art, and a mutual understanding of the world they'd both been shaped by. For a brief moment, Isabel had what had always been denied her, a life of her own. But that moment didn't last. In 1407, just 2 years after their marriage, Charles was captured by the English at the Battle of Agincourt. He would spend the next 25 years as a prisoner in England, and Isabel, once again, found herself alone. In 1409, Isabel gave birth to her only child, a daughter named Jeanne. It should have been a new beginning. Instead, it marked the end. Just weeks after giving birth, Isabel died from complications related to childbirth. She was 20 years old. Her short life had been shaped entirely by the decisions of others. Married off at 6, widowed at 10, imprisoned, remarried at 16, and a mother at 20. She never ruled, never chose, and never truly had a childhood. Even her death passed quietly. No grand funeral, no royal mourning, just the silent end of a life spent serving causes that were never her own. Isabel's story reminds us of the human cost hidden beneath royal ceremony. Behind every treaty, every alliance, every historic wedding, there were real people, often children, forced to carry the weight of adult decisions. More than 600 years later, she remains a symbol of lost innocence and the quiet suffering behind political power. A reminder that history's grand achievements often came at the expense of those who had no voice in them at all.